when we saw on the television about the massacre, about the genocide at Srebrenica, we decided immediately that we should get out a second indictment against Karadzic and Mladic. So we had a lot of the information. We knew what Karadzic's position was, and we were already receiving information and photographs of what had happened at Srebrenica. So we were in a position to move quickly. The frustrating part was that it took over 13 years before Karadzic and Mladic were arrested and came before the court. But by that time, the evidence had mounted, more and more evidence. The United States information became important, of intercepted phone calls between Karadzic and Milosevic, for example. There were other witnesses had emerged. So the case became stronger. In some ways, the case was much stronger now than it would have been 20 years ago. So it's not to the advantage of Karadzic and Mladic. Of course, it's frustrating for the victims that they've had to wait so long for justice, and my heart goes out to them for the frustration and the injustice of the wait. It's a huge responsibility for any prosecutor to sign an indictment of war crimes. To accuse somebody of being a war criminal, particularly genocide or crimes against humanity, is a terrible indictment to make against somebody. And I have no doubt that all prosecutors feel that responsibility as a very heavy responsibility. And certainly I was not prepared to sign any indictments unless I was satisfied that there was sufficient available evidence to bring to a trial in the event of the arrest of the person who was charged with the war crimes. But at the same time, a prosecutor has a responsibility primarily to the victims to ensure that appropriate indictments are brought out and that steps are taken to arrest alleged war criminals. Accountability is crucial in this sort of situation, so one has to weigh all of these responsibilities in an appropriate way. Well, the attitude of any international prosecutor should be, and I think it has been, to investigate and bring out indictments against the most guilty. And the most guilty are the people, the leaders, whether political or military, the leaders who organized and aided and abetted in the perpetration of these massive crimes, and especially genocide and crimes against humanity. So that is the attitude. The attitude of prosecutors is to go for the most guilty. In the beginning, in the ICTY, that wasn't possible. The evidence we had in the beginning was against so-called smaller fish, but they were bricks in building up to indictments, which we got out very quickly. It was less than a year after I arrived as the first chief prosecutor. It was 11 months after that the first indictments were issued against Karadzic and Mladic. The preconditions to indict somebody with the crime of genocide is obviously evidence to prove the special intent that the person had to destroy in whole or in part a people. And the question we had to look at was whether this applied in the Srebrenica situation. The intention there was not to destroy all of the Bosniaks in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The intention was to destroy over 8,000 innocent men and boys in the enclave of Srebrenica. But we came to the conclusion, and the courts, both the ICTY and the International Court of Justice, have supported our decision that a decision to destroy a group of that size in an enclave, in a village of Srebrenica, constituted an act of genocide, and that the necessary intention was there. One needs a number of ingredients, two in particular. One needs to demonize the victim. You know, you can't treat people in that way, whether it was in the Holocaust, in South Africa's apartheid, in Bosnia, in Rwanda. You can't victimize and treat people like that if you think they're your equal at the same level. So they have to be demonized. They have to be called in Rwanda cockroaches. And in addition, there is the aspect of fear. If you add demonization to fear, you get the recipe for genocide and other crimes, crimes against humanity and war crimes. It was the fear and the demonization in Rwanda that led to the genocide. It was the demonization of Muslims in the former Yugoslavia, in particular, of Jews and gypsies and homosexuals in Nazi Germany, that enabled people to be killed en masse. And you need those, I believe you need those two ingredients, but particularly the first one, the demonization, and that's common to all the situations of genocide. In the case of the former Yugoslavia, it's more complex. In the case of Rwanda, we're dealing with one country. It was a civil war situation. In the case of the former Yugoslavia, we're dealing, of course, with three post-independence countries, each with their own history, each with their own involvement, and each one blaming the other. So it's much more difficult in that situation. It's a great shame, in my view, and a disappointment to me, that there has never been a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the former Yugoslavia. As a South African, from my experience of the huge success of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, the people and the victims in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in all the countries of the former Yugoslavia, would have benefited from forcing all people, to quote Archbishop Desmond Tutu, to look at the monster in the eye, and to realize what happened, and to find out that there were victims and perpetrators on all sides, and that it wasn't a question of only the only guilty on one side and only victims on the other. And that truth is important for reconciliation, and it's missing, it seems to me, in the former Yugoslavia. I think above all you need good leadership. I think in South Africa we were blessed in having Nelson Mandela. In Rwanda, I think Paul Kagame has risen above the immediate concerns of his Tutsi people, and he does take into account, it seems to me, the interests of all people of his country. The problem in the former Yugoslavia is you still have Serb, Croat and Bosniak interests and history going back centuries to deal with. And again, I repeat, it's for that reason that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission would have been, and maybe still would be, a good idea. Well, the most important aspect of this is of course, again, the victims. In my view, really the only important customers, if I can put it that way, of justice, whether it's domestic justice or international justice, the customers are the victims. They are entitled to full justice, and to see that the people who are responsible for their victimization, for the terrible things that were done to them, are brought to trial. That's also an important form of acknowledgement. They want a public acknowledgement not only from their own people, in this case in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but they want the world to know what happened. They know what happened, but they want everybody else to understand also what happened. And obviously, the more serious the crime, the more important it is to bring that acknowledgement. Victors, as it were, have a different attitude to the losers. And so I don't like to generalize. I think every situation has to be dealt with differently, with sensitivity, and with as much information as possible of what goes on. And I've got no doubt that from what I've read, and also from what I've experienced on my visit 3 years ago to the former Yugoslavia, that the work of the ICTY, and particularly the big cases against Milosevic, who unfortunately didn't survive to see the end of his trial, but now the ongoing trials of Mladic and Karadzic and those of Perisic and other people who've been brought before the court has had a meaningful effect on the victims. They've received the acknowledgement through the evidence of hundreds of witnesses. What happened has been proven. The history books now will record accurately the terrible war crimes that were committed in the former Yugoslavia.